lot of our conversation when it comes to elections and accessibility, especially in our space here with the assistive technology programs in the past, has been what does elections look like for people with disabilities in a polling place? What does in-person voting look like? Which is an important topic to talk about. And there's a lot of conversations around it, and there's statute in place that addresses accessibility when it comes to uh, in-person voting. You know, you got ADA, you got HAVA, you got the different laws that really talks about it. But there's a lot of conversations in the election space about what elections could look like, and some of those conversations are pretty controversial. Larry and I, we're going to have we decided to do this presentation more as a conversation, and we want all of you to join in as well. If you have questions or comments, we will take questions and comments during the conversation between Larry and I. But we want you to get a feel for what the challenges are when we talk about accessibility currently, and you know, what are the big arguments that we receive, especially from security folks in the election space, when it comes to innovation of, you know, what election technology could look like in the future. With that said, Larry, how do you characterize voting in America these days? You know, what are the big things that you want to touch on?
So first of all, I think it's actually a mess. And I don't think it's getting better, regrettably. I started my journey in elections 11 years ago to start a voting system company, or actually to start a company that started off as an audit company, where it would audit all of the voting system companies' elections. And this was not a statistical audit, it was a complete retabulation of the vote and a comparison of one system versus another. And that led to us becoming a voting system company, and we were the first company to be federally certified as a new voting system company in over 15 years, which is to me a sign of the stagnation of this industry. Along the way, one of the requirements to be a voting system company is that you have an accessible option that, as you indicated, Sachin, that is made available in every in-person voting location in the country by statute. Along about 2016, I got intellectually interested in the application of our technology to remote voting. And specifically, when it comes time to be accessible, as I'm fond of saying, accessible paper ballots are just exactly like clean coal. They do not exist. And I hope I'm not offending anyone in the coal belt states. But so that led me into an investigation of online voting in a pretty deep way. And I retired from my company in 2018 and became an advisor to a little company called Votes. And when I had the opportunity to help join or to help form a coalition for accessible voting, I left that little company back in May. And so just that's by way of introduction, but in answer to your question, Sachin, what we're seeing in this election is something that we've never seen in any other election. And that is, we are living in a pandemic, in the age of a pandemic. And what is going to happen, and I was just on the phone with someone that's doing a lot of the work in Georgia, and asked him what he saw was the number of ballots that will be cast. And he said about half of the election will be now cast on vote by mail. And at this time, virtually none of it will be completely accessible. And so this thus begins kind of a pretty rapid erosion of the rights of people with disabilities to vote in a private and independent and accessible way. There have been furtive attempts through litigation to have remote ballot marking, but the advocates on the security side have basically stopped progress when it comes to the return of the voted ballot. That seems to be the third rail in elections, and thou shalt not touch that rail for fear of electrocution. So I said to someone recently, I feel like right now I've got 2 feet firmly planted in 2 buckets of water, and I have grasped the third rail. So I'm not afraid of touching that. So I'm hopeful, but deeply concerned about where the election we're heading into.
So, as a blind person myself, getting to a polling place is always a challenge. Transportation is probably one of the biggest barriers for people with disabilities. And I've always had to make special arrangements to get to a polling place and then have to deal with all the big lines, which is an ongoing battle. The conversation around electronic voting or online voting is an ongoing conversation, but there's so much pushback because of security threats. What are your thoughts about the threats that is being thrown out by security folks, where this could be a viable option for people with disabilities, especially someone like me, to vote independently and accessibly? What are those threats that's being thrown out there, and why those threats are not being challenged?
So that's a really good question. Let me begin the answer by speaking the language of the security activists, as I call them, which they're very well respected. They're high caliber people. As far as I know, not one of them has ever built a voting system. They're not practitioners in the field. They're largely academics and computer scientists. So one of the terms that they speak of is that a system is vulnerable. So what does a vulnerability mean? I've been in software development all my career. And the biggest project I ever did turned into a multi-billion-dollar product called Lotus Notes, and that was the premier security product. So think of a vulnerability not as a bug, but an alleged bug. So if I say a system is vulnerable because it could leak information about the voter's identity, that's not necessarily a bug, it's an allegation of a bug. And it deserves to be treated and investigated and fixed if it is in fact a bug. An exploit is a vulnerability taken to the step where it becomes a legitimate bug. But they're all, when we think of bugs, the language of the security guys is vulnerabilities and exploits. So let me now try to address your question. By the way, what I'm about to say has been the argument that has been used without much modification for 18 years. So it goes like this. The first thing we can't be sure of is the device that the voter is voting on secure? And let me not refute those right now. Let me just enumerate them. Is the network over which they're voting, the internet, is that secure? Can a man in the middle get in and change your vote without you knowing about it? And then the third area of security is, can the return of the voted ballot be established so that it cannot be altered once it's stored? And these are presented as vulnerabilities, and they're alleged bugs. I will point out that in no implementation that has ever been piloted has there been an exploit of any of these allegations. So it doesn't mean that it can't be. The other areas that they question, or they allege, or they cite as vulnerabilities or potential vulnerabilities is, do we know who's really voting, the identity of the voter? And And is the same person that is voting today the same person that presented credentials remotely, say 3 months ago? And then the final two areas are, can we verify that the voter's ballot was received without modification? And then, is the system accessible and usable as a commercial product? So to my way of thinking, the well has been so poisoned by these allegations, and without acknowledgement when they actually get fixed or cured, that it's almost impermissible anymore to talk about online voting being a solution to anything, much less the severe problems that we have as occasioned by the pandemic and by the misfunction, what's going on in the U.S. Postal Service. So let me just recap here. So these allegations, we deserve to be treated seriously, and all the vendors that I've been aware of have treated them seriously. The activists do not ever give credit when one of their vulnerabilities is demonstrated as being fixed. And so it remains an open question that basically poisons the well. And, but I'll just say, and we can go into this later if there's interest, and maybe do a deeper dive into the technologies that have been introduced in the last 10 years that have addressed almost every one of the problems that I've just mentioned. These are widely found in other industries. They just haven't been brought into elections.
So Larry, myself as an advocate for people with disability and a person with a disability who use assistive technology on a daily basis, the hardest spot, the hardest position that many of us find ourselves in is when we're talking to, say, lawmakers or other interested parties about making voting accessible. The immediate argument is the security piece. Is how do we, as professionals in the field, how do we talk to that point about secure, in the topic around online voting? How do we talk about the security aspect? To basically, how do you debunk that argument about security, so that people with disabilities like myself can have that opportunity? Or is there even a way to make voting accessible, online voting accessible, and please the security folks?
Yes. So any good debater will try to frame the set of arguments in a way that only they can answer. And security is like that. When we talk about, is a system secure, we make it sound, the argument is, the question is framed as though security was a destination and that we will know it when we get there. That is actually not true. That is a false characterization of the term security. Security is actually a journey. And let me give you, I think, a simple proof of what I'm saying. There is no system that can claim to be secure against an unknown threat. And so, and at some point, all threats begin as unknown threats. And so the idea that a system which is deemed secure today will remain secure tomorrow, given an unknown threat manifesting itself, basically reduces the argument to something that cannot be solved. So it makes no sense actually to question, is the system secure? Because the real answer is that no system is ever secure. Instead, what we should be talking about is it any system, a voting system, is it resilient to unknown threats? What do I mean by that? Resilience is a topic that's used in computer science to mean a system is resilient if it is able to, if its operators are able to detect and analyze and prepare a patch and distribute that patch in as close to real time as possible. Whereas security, think of security as a padlock on a door, and the quest is to build a stronger and stronger padlock. But with any padlock, there will always be a stronger bolt cutter. And whereas resilience, we talk in resilience and secure in personal in residential security, for example, we talk about surveillance systems that will warn us of an intruder, even if we happen to be halfway around the world. And that becomes the state of the art in the treatment of security. It is really resilience that we're after. So from a policy point of view, I think it's important to educate the state and local, the state legislatures, the federal legislators on this important distinction, and to point out gently that the conversation has really been hijacked to an unsolvable problem, given that if they keep asking, is the system secure? And the answer really should be no. It is never secure. It may be incredibly resilient, however. So so the challenge is to find an artful way of making that, of bringing up that distinction. And like I said, when no system can be deemed secure against an unknowable threat. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that does. But could you maybe touch on, we live in a system where we do a lot of work online. We do banking online.
Right.
A lot of our work when we meet with our clients, telehealth is a big online space. So there's a lot of work being done in the online space, and there's a lot of security protocols put in those spaces. But it's been well embraced, and people are comfortable with doing that. Why is it any different for elections? And the reason I asked that is some of this conversation around online voting, which could be a big advantage for people with disabilities, continues to be a barrier because security is the red flag.
Right. So recently, the U.S. Senate flirted with remote voting, and one of the principal advocates of against online voting came out in favor of this. And he said the big difference is that when the Senate votes, you know who the voter is, and that voter is basically a known U.S. senator. In a financial transaction or a health transaction, you actually know who the person is, almost by definition, or you couldn't pull up their financial records or their health records. But in voting, you want to maintain the secrecy of the ballot, and that is the primary difference that renders voting more difficult than financial transactions or health transactions. That said, the implication that argument is used to say, let's stop any progress toward online voting because that problem can never be solved. Well, as a matter of fact, it probably can be solved, but it's going to take a period of time to try out solutions and refine them. And that's called piloting. So we pilot elections, and the advocates have changed their arguments recently in the last 2 years away from a technical argument like the secrecy of the ballot to an assertion that online voting is inherently insecure, and therefore you shouldn't even try to solve the problem. I happen to reject that kind of thinking. So when you ask the question, how can we address these really thorny issues? Well, it is by piloting solutions, establishing the requirements, say we need a secret ballot, no issue there. But the technologists are very inventive if they're given a chance. And and I'm familiar with one technology that has actually solved that problem. And if it was allowed to be more widely piloted, we would be seeing that. And it involves having the voter be able to determine right away that their ballot was correctly interpreted without revealing their identity. So that's the distinction that they make. And there is technology that can address that if piloting becomes allowed.
So with that said, could you, without getting too much into the technical side of things, help us understand what would an online voting system look like? What the end-to-end, from the time of ballots requested to the time I get a ballot and the way I would cast it, what would that look like, and what kind of security protocols goes through it? But really don't want to get into too much of the technical side, but just to help us understand what happens in that transaction.
Okay, so let me start by pointing out some of the differences that would occur right up front. So right now you would request an online ballot. You would request a ballot, but on the form that you would request it, you would see a new checkbox that says, I want to basically have an online accessible ballot as opposed to a paper ballot being returned to you. So that'd be the first thing you'd notice. As far as I know, no state has that. Maybe one or two have that. So you check that box, and then you would get an email. You'd provide your email, and you get an email that would have your what are called credentials. It would have a username, typically your email address, and a password which you would use to log into the online system when the polls open. So when the polls open, you take those credentials and you go to a website or to an application, and you use those to identify yourself. That process is called identity proofing. Now, there are more secure ways of doing that, where you actually take a driver's license and take a picture of that, and then that compares to the voter registration file. You take a video selfie that proves your liveness, that proves you're not taking a picture of a picture, et cetera. But that, I'm describing the simple case. So you present your credentials when the polls open, and you receive your ballot style. Now, ballot style is a term that is used in election circles to indicate the list of contests that you are allowed to vote on. In a large county, for example, there may be tens, hundreds, or even thousands of ballot styles. Obviously, the U.S. president and the senator, but down below the senator, you could be in a different congressional district than your neighbor across the street, for example, and you would see a different set of contests. And certainly that's true for the school board races and the zoning boards in different towns in the county. So you receive your ballot style. That shows up in a scrollable screen on your, let's say, your smartphone, and you use, if you are sighted, if you have, you can read it and scroll and navigate it as a sighted person could. If you're vision impaired or blind, you can use the voiceover features available in just about every smartphone out there now, and the ballot will be read to you. And you can go back, you can advance, and you can select a candidate when you get to their name. And When you're finished, you have an option of accessibly reviewing that ballot where it will read back to you your choices. And now you submit the ballot. And so we've covered one level of one of the security issues, which is, are you eligible and authorized to vote? That happened with the present the credentials. So what happens next? You submit the ballot, and in some implementations, that's it. But in implementations that I like, that I've seen that are much more secure, within a few seconds, you'll see a notice on your smartphone that you've received an email, and that email will contain a rendering of the choices that you just made. And you can review that, and in some implementations, there's a cure if you want to dispute that. You've changed your mind, you don't agree with it, you think it was incorrect, and you can dispute it. And so that is different in some sense than any other voting technology that exists today. Once you put your ballot into if you vote in person, once you put your ballot in the machine, there's no retrieving it. So in this system, you can actually dispute the interpretation of the ballot, or change your mind if it's allowed. And so now what is happening under the hood? The vote is encrypted by what are called NIST approved encryption methods. AES 256 is one of them. And it is sent through a transmission protocol, TLS, that also establishes a secure connection with the server, so that you can be guaranteed that your ballot was received as you marked it. You've verified it, that the computer has correctly responded to it. You can verify it when it gets to the other side and comes back to you. And along the way, along the internet, there are protocols to guarantee that the ballot was received in an unmarked way. So when you hear allegations of vulnerabilities, that the ballot may be manipulated in progress, that's a canard. That does not really exist. And there's deep cryptography, very sophisticated cryptography and verification that prevent that from happening. So now the final step is the security of the voted ballot. And a number of implementations do that. The one that I'm very familiar with uses a blockchain architecture, which is used in this cryptocurrency called Bitcoin. And that has never been hacked. And basically what that does is it creates a geographically distributed, redundant version of an immutable ballot, meaning that once it's stored, it can never be changed without detection. And so all those layers of security combine to create a highly secure. Is it impenetrable to an unknown threat? The answer to that is no. However, given that the voter is verifying their ballot in near real time, that's the resilient side of the equation. I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, it
There's
does.
a lot of complexity that goes on under the hood. When
Sure, yeah, and I wanted people to hear the process it goes through in the online voting, because there's always this question that I get asked. Is the same like sending an email? And I know it's not anything like that. So I think it's important for people to know there's a lot more to. It's not that your ballot gets emailed back to your polling place. There's a lot happening under the hood for the security side of it. With that said, what would you say that few things that we need to know as professionals to, the different arguments that comes up um, about online voting? What are the few things that we should be able to let people know how how this how this could be useful for our population that we work with? What how can we counter some of the arguments?
So let me challenge the question. I think that trying to counter the arguments of a very technical nature when presented by people who are experts in the field is going to be a lost cause. What I would rather see us do is to immediately reframe the question into something that has gone missing in the last 2 or 3 years. And that is, we should be encouraging entrepreneurial companies to develop quality solutions and enabling piloting of those solutions to take place so that any issues get brought out in very small settings. We should advocate to the legislature, especially the federal legislature, that a national certification program be instituted to test such systems against a written standard which can evolve over time as we learn new things. So rather than try to counteract a specific question to a system, a given, or just in general as they're doing now, we should establish a process by which new technology can be evaluated, tested, what's called compliance tested against a published standard, and then let that standard evolve as we learn new things. And this is the process, by the way, that goes on in every critical infrastructure industry out there. So elections is deemed as a critical infrastructure. But instead of having a collaborative environment, we have a free-for-all. So a vulnerability is alleged, that is magnified into an assertion that the system is insecure just because we allege a vulnerability, and that stops all progress. For jurisdictions that try to pilot, and I've witnessed this absolutely firsthand, the activists are, and not all of them, they flood that jurisdiction with annoying public records requests. And they look for contracts, they look for all kinds of stuff, and they do it repeatedly. So, which is very disruptive to a jurisdiction, especially in election time. So, to recap, we should establish a process by which this technology becomes rigorously evaluated, put into pilots that are expanded as we gain comfort with the results.
With the elections just about 70 days away, mail-in voting is going to be a primary method of voting.
Have to vote.
Yeah, have to vote this November election. The chances of online voting being implemented in a lot of places is highly unlikely, but there are some counties and a couple of states that are rolling it out and has rolled it out in the past. Can you talk about what does that mean for for folks like me in this coming election? What is our option? And I think I know the answer, but what's going to happen? You have this inaccessible format of mail-in voting coming, but we don't have a lot to turn towards.
That's right. So there are basically 2 or 3 systems out there that are candidates to be used. The So usually it requires state approval of these, and so that's particularly odious to the company that's fielding these systems, because you can't just build one. You've got to, you've got to comply with the regulations in 50 states and more territories. The very short answer to your question about what can be done between now and 75 days from now is really through litigation. And there's about, in one form or another, there's about 85 to 90 active litigations going on in the country right now that range the gamut. But right now, the legislatures are stopping, for the most part, the return of the voted ballot because of the concerns about security. And that basically makes the system insecure if a person like yourself has to figure out how to sign has to sign an envelope, stick it in another envelope, put a stamp on it, take it to the post office, or have someone take it to the post office. But this idea of being able to accessibly, privately, and independently vote, I'm afraid is in the offing. It doesn't exist today. So, but litigation is making some progress. It's not a good answer for the individual, by the way.
So the ATAP, the Assistive Technology Act programs, we have an assistive technology program in every state, and we work with clients directly, but we also have conversations around the state in regards to accessibility. What would you tell to professionals like us? What can we do as professionals in raising awareness about these options that's out there for the future? Like what should we look towards, and what should we work on for the future? We are not experts when it comes to security, when we don't speak that language, but we do speak to lawmakers, and we do speak to other professionals within the states who deal with elections. What should our messaging be?
So I think the first thing is we should be presenting very clearly the benefits of online voting. Some of the activists, the security activists out there, basically dismiss the true benefits, because if you basically agree with the benefits, it's very difficult to argue that we shouldn't be trying something. Let me see if I can run through the benefits really quickly. To the voter, the benefits largely are three. There is, and this election, safety is a new problem. So with online voting, there's no virus that can be transmitted through the internet. So you get to vote from anywhere in the world, and convenience is beyond anything that any other voting technique or any other voting method can claim. So safety, convenience, and accessibility, which is a statutory right that we have. We need to have it extended to remote voting. So that's the impact on the voter. The jurisdiction's impact are realized over time as more and more people do it. But there they lie, and it becomes a much simpler system to administer, and it is way more cost effective than voting in person or sending out mail ballots. Tremendous reduction in costs. To society, the benefits are also longer term, but we will see greater turnout. Now, the activists would dispute that, but no pilot has ever run long enough. Excuse me. no pilot has ever run long enough to see the benefit of greater turnout. It took Estonia, for example, 15 years to move from less than 1% to 47% of the electorate votes online today. So step one is let's be very clear about what the benefits are. Then let's be very clear about the steps that need to be taken, which are process steps. And we should argue very forcefully against, because we cannot guarantee security does not mean we cannot, that we have to stop progress. No system, including paper ballots and vote by mail, is secure. And take paper ballots. There's no security against an out of control fire in the warehouse before the ballots are counted. And that would be devastating. And yet that's a vulnerability to a paper-based system. And then the third thing is that we should be encouraging an aggressive piloting program where we are learning. And if we put that into place, progress will be absolutely inevitable. I'm sorry I have no magic bullet for you here, nor a gun to shoot it if I had it.
So let's take a let's pause over there. And Amy, do we have questions?
Yes, we do have a few questions that have come in from Melinda. She's wondering, do any other countries utilize online voting successfully?
They do. They're few and far between, but Estonia is the poster child for online voting. It's a small country, I think less than 3 million voters, but they have a very well-oiled, very secure system. They're neighbors to Russia. Russia has tried to hack the system unsuccessfully, and but it's testimony to the fact that if you're willing to do the work, you can solve the problem.
Cool. Question from Kathy, who wanted to know, as you walked through the steps in the online voting, how does the voter learn how to work through it?
That's actually probably one of the best. Okay, so I'm just speaking from experience in the system that I know, but all the online voting system companies require no training at all, they have honed the user interface, the usability side, so that someone can pick up a smartphone, for example, turn on VoiceOver if they're blind, and just vote. I participated in a pilot in West Virginia in 2018 where we were worried about this. And of the number is 92% went through the credentialing problem without a hitch. And of the 92% that did that, 97% actually successfully voted without any help at all.
Cool. And lastly, you mentioned piloting.
Yep.
So who determines if piloting is allowed?
Well, right now it is the state legislature that makes it possible, but it then requires the willingness of a jurisdiction or an election official in a jurisdiction to be willing to do it. Now, I found that if the state allows it, there are people out there who are willing to take a chance and try it out. They'll start off with military and overseas voters or disabled voters as the first baby steps that have relatively few voters compared to the general population, and they'll get their feet wet doing that, and then basically expand from that.
And this is Sachin. So West Virginia is a good example where they started with few counties, and I believe right now they have over 20 some counties, Larry? That
Yeah,
is
they
doing
started
it?
with 2 in
Yeah.
the primary of 2018. They went to 24. And in this upcoming election, all 55 will be using it.
Yeah, so West Virginia is a great example on how slowly they have convinced the counties at large to buy into this idea of online voting, and it's by piloting. And you can't pressure people into getting comfortable with this new concept. Utah, for in other instance, one of the counties in Utah tried it in 2018, I believe it was the first time.
2019, yeah, 2019.
Yeah, 2019, and has had great success. And we've also used it within the Republican convention, state Republican convention in Utah, and they had great success in doing it in that format as well. So it's the idea of introduction of this technology and piloting it so that people get comfortable with the technology and answering any questions that they have. The problem that has happened is the roadblock that gets put, that there's no conversations, the dialogue stops. So piloting is the best way to show how this can really work.
I would say that the opposite of progress is fear.
That's a great quote. Not a question, but a comment from Shauna that it's okay if there's no magic bullet, and she appreciates the expert perspective without political rhetoric.
Good, thank you.
And that is it for the questions right now. Questions and comments right now.
So I have a question of you, Sachin. How did you, I know how I got into it. How'd you get roped into this little industry?
So, I became a citizen in 2008, and 2008 is the first time I voted. And I remember going into a polling place and voting for the first time for the presidential election. And my first experience was asking the poll worker on an accessible option, and the machine existed, but nobody knew how to turn it on. And that's where the frustrations, the process, people were coming in and out, voting and leaving. By the time I got in there and by the time I left, it was almost an hour and a half. Now, that's when I've already passed the line, an hour and a half waiting to get my machine sorted out and then voting and leaving. That's where I started getting interested to see, what are the options out there? People have different options to vote. Why do people with disabilities have just the one option? So, having different options to vote, whether, if you want to do mail-in vote, there are people with disabilities who can take advantage of mail-in vote if that's an option within the state or the county. But having different options provided to people with disabilities, that's what I am after, not restrict someone to just one option. You have to go to this particular polling place and vote only this way.
That's a really good point. And what I would urge people who hear the arguments against online voting, there's a few telltale signs that you're being manipulated here. One of them is the presumption that we will flip a switch and that everyone will do this and there will be no other method of voting. That's nonsense. This will take place over time, if it's successful at all. And it will, it'll run through pilots. The pilots will get larger. People will become more comfortable with it, just like they did in Estonia. It took 15 years to go from shade less than 1% to 47%. And I don't expect anything differently. Just like the opposite of progress is fear, I think the opposite of winning is not trying. And if we continue not to try, which is basically where we are right now as a country, we will never solve the problems that this pandemic or others has posed. and we will once again be in a terrible situation in another 4 years. And by the way, you know, I would be surprised if if the turnout, which will probably be a record turnout, exceeds 70% of the electorate. It's been hovering around 50. This is not of registered voters. This is of voting eligible, voting age voters. That number has basically been around 50% for the last few years, last few presidential elections. In primaries, it goes down to about 30% or 25%. And in municipal elections, it's 15%. So that just gives you an idea of how terrible. And when it's 15% in a close election, that means 7.5% of the electorate decides who your council members are, if you're going to allocate money for sewage treatment or water purification or something where millions, tens of millions of dollars are spent. And 7.5% make that decision. Something's broken.
Yeah, no, I agree. Kim or Amy, that's kind of what we wanted to bring to the group.
Okay.
So.
Any other questions or comments from our listening audience? Please enter them in the chat now.
And Sachin and Larry, we want to take this opportunity to thank you again. This has been extremely informative and helpful to all of us. You've inspired us and given us some actionable items. Oh, I see there's another, is that a question? Oh, no. Clayton is also agreeing that it was well done. So thank you. And Sachin, I know that you have another call that you do have to get to, so.
Yeah, let me make one further statement here.
Sure.
Yesterday, in the last 3 days, I worked on a PowerPoint presentation, and I woke up this morning saying, I don't want to do that. I want Sachin and I to talk, but I've talked to Kim, and that PowerPoint will be made available, and it's got a lot of good speaker notes in it, so including some references. So if you'd like to download that, that'd be great. And but much of the material that we covered today is in there in one form or another.
Thank you, Larry. And we will be sending out an email. So when that is posted and online, folks will get an email letting them know how to access that.
Good.
Hello, everybody. This is David Shear. Kim, can I make an announcement at this time?
Yes, please do.
First, I want to say thanks again, Sachin and Larry, for such a thought-provoking conversation. And before we end today, we would like to make a special announcement. Our colleague and our good friend Amy Goldman is retiring at the end of August. AT3 and ATAP are going to miss Amy greatly. Her dedication and passion advocating for the needs of those who use assistive technology know no limits. Those of you who regularly attend AT3 webinars know we have all benefited from Amy's ability to monitor the Zoom chat window and moderate AT3's live events, especially during this pandemic. Amy, thank you for all that you have done. Your top-notch professional support to the AT-ACT programs during your time with the AT3 Center has made a significant difference. Throughout your career, you have worked tirelessly to ensure that all who need it have access to and the resources they need to obtain assistive technology. We thank you and wish you all the very best as you embark on your retirement.
Thank you for the kind words, everyone.
Yes.
And stay in touch. My personal email will be posted in an outgoing message in the next week or two. And I'll miss you, but remain engaged as the president-elect of the U.S. Society for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, as well as various and sundry other volunteer roles until such time as I can travel. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. We are going to miss you. And thank you all for joining us. And again, thank you, Larry and Sachin. And with that, we will end the call, and just keep an eye out. If you haven't completed the survey, please do. And keep an eye out for information about the posted video and the PowerPoint. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe and have a great afternoon.